Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I know that if you were in St. Louis, today was a bit of a gloomy day, but we are so happy to have you here in this virtual world. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books welcomes debut author, Miranda Popkey, who will discuss her just now out in paperback topics of conversation. Miranda will be in conversation with the award-winning author, Karen Russell. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Miranda and Karen, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are incredibly happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so please type your questions as a comment, and we will get to those at the end. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. We have so many incredible events already lined up for the year and are adding events daily. Just in the past week, I've hosted a Nobel Prize winner and a Pulitzer Prize winner, so I'm incredibly happy to be adding Miranda to that list. About topics of conversation. A compact tour de force about sex, violence, and self-loathing from a ferociously talented new voice in fiction, perfect for fans of Sally Rooney, Rachel Cusk, Lydia Davis, and Ginny Offel. Composed almost exclusively of conversations between women, the stories they tell each other, and the stories they tell themselves. Topics of conversation careens through 20 years in the life of an unnamed narrator, hungry for experience and bent on upending her life. In exchanges about shame and love, infidelity and self-sabotage, Popkey touches upon desire, disgust, motherhood, loneliness, art, pain, feminism, anger, envy, and guilt. Edgy, wry, and written in language that sizzles with intelligence and eroticism, this novel introduces an audacious and immensely gifted new novelist. Named a Best Book of the Year by Time, Esquire, Real Simple, Good Housekeeping, Marie Claire, Glamour, and Bustle. The New York Times Book Review says, Sally Rooney-esque. Popkey's sentences careen breathlessly, as her halting staccato prose mirrors the churning within the narrator's mind. Her manner of parceling out information evoke at times the fragmentary and diaristic sensibilities of Ginny Offel's Department of Speculation, a shrewd record of the act of unflinchingly circling these amorphous notions of pain, desire, and control. And NPR says, slim but potent, has the flavor of Rachel Cusk, provocative, sure to spark conversation. And now about tonight's speakers. Miranda Popkey was born in Santa Cruz, California in 1987. She graduated with a BA in Humanities from Yale in 2009 and with an MFA in Creative Writing from Washington University in St. Louis in 2018. She has written for, among other outlets, The New Republic, The New Yorker's Page Turner blog, the Paris Review Daily, The Hairpin, The Owl, GQ, and New York Magazine's The Cut. Not The Cult. Oh, goodness. Karen Russell, who Miranda will be in conversation with tonight, has received a MacArthur Fellowship and Guggenheim Fellowship, the 535 Prize from the National Book Foundation, the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award, and the Berlin Prize from the American Academy. She lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband, son, and daughter. And now I will stop my tongue-tying and stumbling over words and welcome the incredible Miranda Popkey and Karen Russell for Left Bank Books. Hello.
Thank you, Shane.
So much.
It's a real honor to be here, and I'm so happy to be launching the paperback with Miranda. This like fantastic book, and I guess we'll just take on faith that many people are out there with us
They are.
in our
I can
Trinity
tell
of
you
Power.
I prefer to pretend that it's just the three of us and we're doing this
Oh, 100%. So
some
funny
reason of
enough,
our own.
I just got LASIK eye surgery, and I sort of sometimes wish to go back to my like happy, like Mr. Magoo like conviction that, you know, I'm like, everyone's probably smiling, and now I can like see the micro pulse of emotion on faces, and I miss the old way, you know. Yeah, anyhow, I was rereading Topics of Conversation, which not to embarrass Miranda further, but some years ago, I remember Ben Marcus, who is a fabulous professor of mine, writing. We were corresponding about something else, and he said, "Have you ever heard of this writer, Miranda Popkey?" And I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "You'll be hearing about her soon." And as it turns out, we now have by the transitive property of so many beloveds, Jordan Pavlin, our fantastic editor, and Denise Shannon, our agent. But this was sort of like back in the hinterlands. And I remember there's something so beautiful about getting sent a manuscript. It's almost like sort of a dream in utero or something. And so I don't actually, this is our first Real Voices uncanny eye contact conversation. But it's funny because I feel like I have been staging a conversation with your amazing book, and basically every book I've read since, to the point where I was sort of surprised when you told me that you hadn't read some of these other books, because I have had like such a robust and lively dialogue across texts. And I thought maybe we could just start there. This is not a spoiler, but one of my favorite sentences in this book of about conversations. The other thing that I was thinking about rereading is I can really imagine a terrible editor saying, well, how does this further the narrative, right? Or, well, this really slows down the narrative. And in your book, it is the narrative, and I just sort of love that about storytelling generally, the way you can assert yourself in the act of disappearing, how it's sort of both. There's a line here about the narrator's suspicion of origin story. So what I'm saying is that my life, like the lives of most people, lacks an origin story. I mean, one with any explanatory power. One of the weirdnesses of a book tour, right, is that you're frequently asked to kind of construct this post-hoc confabulation of how your book came into the world. And I sort of love it because you're like, oh, thank God it's in the world now, right? It's sort of like a victory lap a little bit, but I often feel that I'm lying or omitting so much, right? And so I wondered, like, now that you've done a bunch of these events, right? Sort of maybe what have you learned about this book from doing events like this one? And if you could tell us like a little bit about, with the caveat that both of us are suspicious of origin stories, but if you could tell us like a little bit about how it came to be.
Yeah. So on the one hand, I feel that I've been writing this book for 20 years. All of the thoughts that I have had about desire and femininity and being socialized as a woman, and the kinds of narratives that exist about women, especially that existed about women in the 80s and 90s, and that was the culture that I was consuming as I grew up. All of the thoughts that I've had over the course of my life about those kinds of things sort of ended up here. I mean, it's a little embarrassing. Like, it's a short book and it represents 20 years of very intense thought. But there are also, so in that sense, the beginning is completely amorphous. And it begins, at the moment that I am able to conceive of myself as a subject, a consciousness who is a subject, but then also a woman in the world, which is to say an object of other people's gaze. But then there are these moments that I can remember so clearly, when a line came to me or a scene came to me. I can remember that there's a line in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles 2011 section, that involves people sort of being packed into a room like pudding into a pudding cup. And that is first, that's a line that I had in my head for 2 months over the summer when I was between the first and second years of my MFA, when I was writing a terrible novel that I ended up discarding. And I started with that sentence and I wrote a short story that became this section, Los Angeles 2011. And so I can sort of date it from there. But I can also date it from the late night in, I think it must have been September, October in 2017, when I was, scrolling through Twitter. I don't think we called it doom scrolling then, but it was the same thing. It was doom scrolling. All of these stories about Harvey Weinstein, there was just all of a sudden a flood of all of the sort of secrets that people had been keeping circulating private were suddenly being made public, and just feeling this rage at Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, that tremendous. It's so funny, we write in sort of different registers, but I thought that was so interesting to see, like, during part of this mass exorcism was like a torrent of stories about sex and power and like kind of the ghostly realm of, all this poltergeist activity that had been surfaced. And like the wailing pain of that was remarkable, right? And so I know what you mean, that you can sort of find these discrete, there's like an archipelago or something where you're like, okay, well, here's something I can actually source. Like, I do remember, this did generate this particular scene or something.
And then there are also these like buried. So the back of the book has this section called Works Not Cited, which is just a crazy mishmash of all of the works of popular and not so popular culture that were on my mind as I was writing, and then I think the book is somewhat in conversation with. And one of them is Curtis Hanson's LA Confidential, based on the James Ellroy novel, which I watched obsessively, like once or twice a month for an entire year when I was 12 or 13 years old. It is not a movie for a 12 or 13-year-old, but I went. It is a movie about power relationships, and specifically about power relationships between men and women, and also it's also about sex work. Anyway, I went home at some point during the writing of this book, and I found just such embarrassing evidence of my obsession with this movie, which is it's a movie about like self-destructive people who are behaving in sort of violent / passionate ways, depending on how you look at it. And I had created like a serial killer, like a literal serial killer. I had cut letters out of magazines to create an incredibly hard quiz for myself about the movie LA Confidential. It was like object that I found.
Did you remember doing that, or this was like a fossil of something that you excavated?
No,
something you had loved? Yeah.
When I thought, I was like, oh yeah.
Right.
I remember doing this.
But you hadn't thought about it in decades, right? That's a really special, eerie discovery, I think.
I remember my two best friends at the time, and me trying to like interest them in this, and both of them just backing away.
They're like, let's get the tiger beat. Like, I don't want to read your Zodiac Killer quiz. That is amazing. One of the quotes that I pulled, just because it was reverberating for me when I was rereading, this is from Mary Gateskill. And she was asked by somebody, which is a kind of a common question, right? What was the book that most influenced your life or your career as a writer? And she said, this is a hard question to answer because influence is often unconscious and indiscriminate. When people are asked to name the books that influenced them, they'll name their most favorite, prestigious authors, the people they hope they were influenced by and perhaps legitimately were. I think I've been influenced by, old Vlad Nabokov, simply because I've read him intensely for so many years. And I would say the same to a lesser degree of Flannery O'Connor. But I've also been influenced by writers I actually don't admire as much because I read them early at a crucial time in my life, and they touched me on a non-intellectual level. Some writers I would put in that category are Victor Hugo and Tom Wolfe, from whom I learned at age 17 that writing can be elastic, playful, and can work like sound. And I was thinking, like, I love your works not cited. And I love, the high and low of it, right? Because influence is just like irreducibly mysterious. And one of the things that I really felt in this book is, there are curated, there are ways where you can stage a conversation. You can decide, you can invite, and it's a freedom that novelists have that I don't even know that like visual artists necessarily have, right? Where you can say, I want to be in touch with these voices from the dead and with the, and then there's like just the seepage. And you do such a beautiful job in this book at being honest about both kinds of influence, right? The sort of the stuff that, whatever 12-year-old in the daisy chain of selves, whatever that iteration of you needed from that movie, right? It's sort of mysterious, right? That would be the,
and as I'm thinking about it, there are probably things that I didn't mention, not even out of embarrassment, but out of thinking like, oh, that probably didn't influence me. Like the fact that I spent hundreds, possibly thousands of hours reading, Agatha Christie mysteries or Nancy Drew mysteries, that probably didn't influence me, but I'm sure on some level it did. I had this like children's copy, a children's history book about all of the presidents. And I remember reading that obsessively when I was a child, and like specifically looking at, it must have been printed after Clinton's first term, because I remember his charming face in there. But I remember looking at the John F. Kennedy portrait, which is of such a different tenor than every other presidential portrait. And, that's probably in there. Something from that book is probably in there.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, so much of the book, it's interesting because I now, I didn't when I read this originally, but now have like a baby daughter. And, for all the progress that we've made, if you go to any toy aisle in America, I guess we can't right now, but I mean, it's just like, it is so truly depressing to sort of sense too how, you sort of arrive in this open field of possibilities and really like the corset strings start to tighten right away. The gauge of what it is acceptable to feel and say starts to narrow when kids are pre-verbal. It's wild. And that was something, I think that the book is so interested in, sort of like scripted, impoverished fantasies, like these received narratives that kind of like tumble into us, and generally like the pain of being born into this contest that you have no role in designing.
If I were smarter, had a better memory, like the thing that would spark for me right now is, some Freud or some Lacan about entering into, the polymorphously perverse child sort of entering into language. But what is actually coming to mind is the movie Rocky, which I had to turn off. I've never seen it before. But I know, of course, I know Rocky, I Am a Tiger,
But that's the other weird thing about influence, just osmotically, right? You're like, me too. I've never seen that movie, but we're on the stairs together now,
Yeah. And like Adrian, and he really loves Adrian, whatever. Right. So at a certain point, I'm like, I guess I should, it was because my husband and I had watched Creed, and I was like, I guess I should watch Rocky, right? And like 20 minutes in, there's basically a date rape that is, that's overblowing it. He takes Adrian out, and he brings her, they go out on a date or whatever, and he brings her back home, and his apartment is like already a crime scene. It is a gigantic red flag. There's a mattress pushed up against one of the walls. It has a knife stuck in it. Like, why is there a knife stuck in your like, okay, why is a mattress against a wall? Fine, whatever. Are you punching it? Maybe that's maybe explicable. Why did you stick a knife in there? Is that like your knife storage solution? trying to leave because she's a woman
Yeah.
in the apartment with a knife mattress. And, you know, if she's not careful, I have to imagine she's thinking like that knife mattress could be me.
Oh, totally. You know, it's so funny you mentioned that because we were, that not that sort of unfunny SNL sketch about like cults versus murder stories. And I do, you know, I don't know if you guys, why would you have seen this? It was not very funny, but it was just sort of about men's attraction to cult movies and films and series, and like women being really interested in true crime. But having like sort of like beyond just like being interested in evil and the psych, those kinds of intellectual questions, just practically not wanting to be murdered, in a way that feels very gendered actually to me, like, really like having a different orientation towards and like living with that kind of threat, like kind of just that calculus is with you in a different way, right? Like you're and I think that was something that was so interesting about the way that you write about desire and its complexity. So it's never it's not reductive in any way, but there is also this sense, I was thinking about Artemisia, who is, there's this young woman and it's her friend's mother, and they're having this sort of, it's this intimacy ante where she's sort of been invited into this like private recollection. And it really, to me, I had so many body memories of exactly that. It's a very specific intimacy with like a good friend's mother.
Because there's that play acting of she's not your mother, so
not your mother. She's a woman, and you're relating as women, sort of, right? But there's like, it's asymmetric, obviously,
right? But you feel
like almost something like an affair about it, You're like, ooh, I've entered a space that your daughter will never know,
Yeah, and like you're cheating on your mom with this other mom, and you're sort of pretending to be an adult because this other woman is treating you as an adult, while of course understanding that she's, that you're the same age as her daughter. So in some ways she understands how profoundly you are not.
Some level, and also if the daughter were to enter the room, you would both like shrink into your roles again, right? You would like, the elasticity would snap and you would just, and but I've never read a scene like that. It's such a very specifically weird, I was thinking about my Miami childhood best friend at that time, whose mom was like, my psychic told me to put, my friend on birth control. And I was like, oh, but just like those kinds of disclosures that feel like a trespass when you're very young, right? And right, like play acting. And anyway, so why did I bring this up? Because she's telling the story of sort of the power play in her relationship. And then the way that it is freighted, no matter, even in a meeting of equals, like there is still this like a dimension of like real physical power, like brute power, that of course like freaks everything.
And the story she's telling is very much, the story she's telling, I think, is When She Believes. It's a story about her marriage and about her.
Sorry for this Blair Witch version of our. I just got to find a power outlet. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. You have a beautiful house. I love your plants.
Everyone is like queasy. I'm sorry for like the magic teacups. That was when I was mouthing to like a ghost. That was just my husband. I realized I needed the charger. Oh, I'm sorry.
But
the story she was telling is When She Believes.
It's When She Believes. And it's basically about the power of knowing knowing how you are positioned in a power relationship. And the power that comes with that knowledge is, she suggests, not diminished by being the person who has less power. If you have less power in a relationship, if you know that, and if that's what you want, then you might as well have equal power, I think, is what she wants to say, or what she wants to tell herself. But it's also we're talking at the beginning about the lack of origin stories, or the sort of suspicion of origin stories. And it's also very much a kind of origin story for her marriage that she is telling, because that is the story she has had to tell herself in order to achieve some kind of contentment in her relationship. And I think it is so, it's so tricky, of course. Like, I think that I think most of us sort of narrativize our own lives. I have met one person who said to me that he was a man, was obviously a man, who said to me that he did not think of his life as a narrative. He was, I think, definitely a I mean, like, I don't want to. He was someone who believed
Was
that
he having a stroke at that time? Like what?
he was a person who believed that whatever emotion you were feeling, it was totally possible to just set it aside and go about with your day. Yeah. So like, yeah, he was a real like emotional bootstrapper. Like, you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps out of the emotion you're having into the emotion that you want to have. Wild time in my life when I knew that person. Anyway, he said that he did not think of his life as a narrative at all. And I was like, okay, like, what is the inside of your brain and what is your consciousness? Because
how do you like show up at the airport on time? Like, how do you live in time at all, right? If you don't.
Exactly. But I mean, I think for the rest of us non-sociopaths who do narrativize, I think it's really important to think carefully about the kinds of stories that we are telling ourselves. Because you get attached to a certain kind of story and then you sort of fit your life to agree with the contours of the story that you're telling.
Absolutely. You know, I saw in your work cited, which made me happy, that you are also an Esther Perel fan.
Yes.
What is your favorite Esther Perel episode, if you have one? And what's I would just love to hear sort of what's appealing to you about that show. And for people who don't know Esther Perel, I love her so much too. She's this brilliant couples therapist, and she has a podcast, Where Should We Begin? Where in 50 minutes she does this like amazing like Aikido of narrative. You know, she gets people to tell their stories, and like with the elegance and intelligence of Miranda Popkey. I'm sorry. Shane is back.
Yeah, you were breaking a little.
I was coming in just in case we needed to continue the conversation because it seemed like you were breaking up a little bit.
I'm so sorry. I hate, it's really a specific Zoom sorrow where someone's just like taxidermied there, like just a taxidermied Muppet, you know?
But okay, you're back. Esther Perel. I don't know. So I was listening. I found it really helpful, and I wasn't thinking about it in this sort of. I wasn't thinking about it I wasn't listening to this podcast because I thought it would be useful, but it ended up being useful listening to people sort of monologue about their own lives while I was writing this book, because it's a lot of people monologuing about their own lives. But the episode that sticks out to me is one that is a more recent one from after the book was published, and it's two people who started an affair and left their respective partners, but sort of cannot figure out how to be together. And it's really one of the only times I've heard her. I mean, she doesn't say like, you guys should break up.
Right.
She doesn't say like, this is not going to work. She does say like, maybe like what's in your future is like a really profound friendship.
Yeah, like a kind carnival psychic, right? She'll say.
Yeah, but I think what sticks with me in that conversation is that it's two people who are trying. They both want the same thing, which is to be together, and they're both trying so hard to figure out how to make that work. And it doesn't matter because there are other forces, or there are fundamental incompatibilities. And I think about that couple all the time. And I wonder if they stayed together. I wonder if they ended up breaking up. Like, I wonder if they still talk, because and I think one of the reasons I relate to it is it's such a feeling I'm familiar with, like wanting to make something work, and just like at every turn, something is thwarting you.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And like that kind of powerlessness over your own conditioning in a way, right? I mean, because it's such a mutually expressed desire to stay together, but it's almost like magnetism, right? They can't find a way to do it. There was one line in this where it was so simple. It was sort of like the way that we mistrust our own desires, right? Like not being able to want what everything is telling you should want. And like the perversity of that, right? Because you really do want to feel like this conscious agent, you want to feel like you're authoring your life in a way. And so to come up against that like haunted activity, and I think that's what I really appreciate here too, is like you really get into like the subatomic landscape of desire in this way. And sort of like people feeling like, well, the perverse choice feels more like a choice maybe. I was thinking about, so it's always fun to reread. You learn about yourself too. And I think what was exciting to me, I've never read anything like this where you're sort of in the listening position. I mean, I think where you're and so deeply in the listening position that you're vibrating with someone and experiencing their own reactions and the effluvia of their memory and their own sensations with them. But then I was in that role again, and I was just thinking, oh my goodness, this hotel scene. Mm-hmm. I had just read an interview with someone talking about how when you're young, sometimes the relationships you're drawn to, it's just a field of possibility. It's to experience your life. So what love becomes is a way to access something that you could not otherwise access. And like you write about that amazingly, right? Like sort of people who are uncomfortably aware that they're using another sentience to feel something, right? Yeah. That it really, and then even more confusingly wanting to be used in that same way.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, a world in which we were able to form our own desires absent sort of the machinations of, I mean, especially sort of like gendered, heterosexual, patriarchal culture, in a society where we were also completely comfortable being absolutely transparent about our desires. It would be possible to have an exchange with, have some kind of emotional or romantic or sexual exchange with someone in which it was very clear to both parties what each wanted and what each could offer. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, I think, is that ideal, or is that an ideal, or is that just not even possible? Because that's sort of that's not the way that humans work. It feels, well, and that's not the way that I work. It feels very risky to tell someone what it is that you want.
Oh yeah. I love that line about this woman whose fantasy was to write down her desires on a piece of paper, then give it to her husband, and then just forget what she wrote. I mean, I thought that was like the most economically expressed, but I mean, who can't relate, it is, I think that's beautifully put. I was just thinking that about Esther Perel. One of my favorite episodes is a lesbian couple. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, but I definitely, like, if I was a therapist, would have bungled this, I think. So there's just very like kind of hetero roles, actually. Like one of them was sort of like the dad, I work, I read the newspaper, I'm not so involved with the kids. And then the mother was totally like feasted upon, like predated by her children. But in that, I recognize something of the surrender that you write about in other contexts. And today I heard myself saying to my son, I was like, just wipe it on me. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know. Like I mean, you can really chart a through line, you know what I'm saying? And there is something about being a vessel, like a literal vessel for life. I've just been, in your book, gave me a new way to kind of start to think about some of these ligatures between this time where like you are predated upon by your children in such a literal way, and you are a vessel for life, and you are in a way that is not unpleasurable, like kind of eclipsed, right? You're sort of displaced from the center. And there's something so liberating about that, even as there's an erasure too. Yeah. And it happens again. And I also sort of think you sort of see it what the patriarchy runs on a little bit. And maybe it's like, just wipe it on me, and like.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Like there's the cliche of a woman who wants to fix a man, you know, sort of broken wing syndrome. You want to take some decrepit.
That's my 8 Mile fantasy. That's why I love 8 Mile.
Oh my God. I love that movie too. It's like yeah. You want to like sort of take the wrapper into your arms and like heal.
And there's power in that, right? Because it's like a transformation, right? I mean, it's really
but it's also like, okay, you've made one decision, and that one decision makes all of your other decisions for you.
Right.
Because all you have to do is fix this one person. All you have to do is all you have to do. You just have to devote your entire life to
No, but it's very clear, right? I mean, I do think there was a period in my own life, and I was thinking about this reading the book too, where speaking of monologuing, one of the things I love that is a surprise is that these women let themselves speak without interruption. You know what I mean? It's like so novel and refreshing that you're hearing a woman tell her story without interruption. Beautiful.
It is a fictional conceit.
Right. Well, there's so much craft in that, I guess. And I was thinking like, it feels to create something that is a distillation of a conversation that has the rhythms of a story. It's just like, it's done. So I felt like I learned so much reading these, but I guess I was going to say like, now I've lost my train a little bit. Monologuing. Oh, the narcissist. So there is a pleasure to being in the company of someone who is so involved in their own dramas because the role is so clear.
Yeah.
And I feel like the narrator finds herself in that situation more than once where it's like they have generated such a powerful wake around their ego. And it's like the lazy river. You can just kind of relax into it.
Exactly. I mean, and of course, at a certain point, you get frustrated with it. You're like, I also have something to say about it.
Yeah.
But there is a power and a pleasure in letting someone just unload their shit on you, and then you're like, oh no, sorry, we're out of time. Like, can't tell you anything about my life. Goodbye.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what I really appreciated is I sometimes hear, and I've read, I don't know if I have maybe time for one more question. Shoot. I want to be that guy who doesn't live in time or narrativize his life. Then we would have just like the space, you know, oh goodness. I guess I was just going to say like one of the things that frustrates me sometimes is this binary between agency and passivity. And I feel like you found a way to write about this that totally about the porosity of being, it's not passive, right? There's a choice in it. Like you can examine the context in which this choice is made, but I would never call your narrator passive, you know? No,
I mean, if there are moments in which she does not act, it's very deliberate. And I do feel like the template for this is like at its most fundamental level is like the dominant, like the sub-dom relationship, where the person who is setting the boundaries is the person who is not in control, who is the sub, like it, and that's the only way that it can work. If the person who is setting the boundaries is the dom, like that is that I mean, that's just going to end up being torture / murder.
Yeah, that's the knife in the
that's like the knife. That's the knife in the mattress.
So my last question, and then I think I've got happily, but speaking of, you know, just like a selfish interlocutor, I wish we could talk longer. It's been such a pleasure. But I wondered sort of about the reception. You know, I think it's been a little over a year since the hardcover came out. So maybe how your own orientation to this book has changed and maybe what you've learned or what surprised you about the way it was received.
Well, devastated I didn't win the Nobel, obviously.
Yeah, that's so lame.
Devastated. No, but I think I was actually really, really pleased with the seriousness with which it was taken. There is one, well, there's one review that will haunt me for the rest of my life, and I will not mention the publication in which it appeared or the review's author, although of course I have those details at my fingertips. But for the most part, it was taken seriously, and not every reviewer loved it, but I think most reviewers engaged with it on its own terms. And there was also one review that that sort of considered the book to be a kind of like something akin to a rape apology. Like, this entire book is just a woman who's asking for it, or this entire book is about. This book is about a woman who basically wants to be taken advantage of, and what is the feminist lesson there? And honestly, I thought that I was aware of that potential reading, and I was very, very nervous about that potential reading, because it is right there for you to grab at. She makes the kinds of decisions that you would not consider like capital F feminist. Like, she's not a good feminist, seen from a certain perspective. But in general, I was really charmed and like pleased and just honestly relieved that the way that people engaged with the novel seemed to be in conversation with the novel I actually wrote. Because that is, and I've seen it happen with, with friends whose books I love, where it's like, you read the review and you're like, what novel?
And the review is just their fantasy fiction of their own,
Yeah. Well, I think someone's projecting. But
yeah. I think it might be you're thinking of, totally.
I was, apart from the whole Nobel thing, which, very disappointed. I was
big mistake. They'll regret it.
Pleasantly surprised.
That's great. All right, Shane. I see my mic, sadly,
but you're still here. We still have several more minutes.
I might make you answer my questions.
That's true. Somebody who I owe money to might show up in the chat. Shane will be like, "What's your PIN number?"
Well, I wanted to start before we ask any questions. Miranda, I understand that you have something that you would like to, like a reward for people who are buying the book from Left Bank Books.
Oh yes. So I thought that so this is a literary event, but I don't want it to be completely divorced from context and from what is happening in the world. And of course, right now we're sort of dealing with the aftermath of a terrible mass murder in Atlanta, and also the problem of anti-Asian racism has been one that has obviously predates the pandemic, but has been heightened by the pandemic. So if you are tempted to buy a paperback and you need a little push over the edge, I will be, I'm going to ask Left Bank to sort of tally up the number of paperbacks that they sell in the next 24 hours. And then for each paperback, I'm going to donate $10. I'm going to split that between two organizations. One is a mutual aid fund that is working with migrant and immigrant sex workers to organize for labor rights. And one is the AAPI, Stop AAPI Hate. And I want to get I'm not remembering the name of the mutual aid.
Red Canary Song.
Yes, thank you.
And I've shared links for both in the comments as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you don't want to buy the book and you just want to send your money straight to them, like, totally understand. Great decision. But if you want to buy the book, and just know that that will also contribute.
And you could do both too. So you could buy the book and get a fantastic book out of the deal and make a donation that way, through the fantastic generosity of Miranda, or you can make a direct donation as well. So, all right. So I want to start with a question that I think is incredibly relevant, and it is directed for both of you. So it's kind of going off the topic that we just looked at, and a lot of the other things that we have seen happen over the last year. Both of your most recent books, Sleep, Donation, and Topics of Conversation, deal very much with things that are still kind of happening in current events and happening daily. So I'm wondering if you were to have like a magic 8 ball or like a time device to go back in time, do you think there are significant things to either novel that might change based on the way that you've seen 2020 kind of plow through?
Oh,
That's a good question.
And maybe impossible to answer.
Yeah. I would say, because this novel was cooking for so long in my brain, I do think that it would have come out the same way, even if I'd written it a little bit later. I think actually what might have happened is that I might not have written it. I think in the past year, year and a half, I have frankly not been doing a ton of writing, and it's because other things have captured my attention and have seemed more urgent. So I think, probably a couple of years later, I'm not sure that I would have prioritized my own writing. And I guess it is up to the reader to decide whether or not that's a good thing.
Oh, that would have been heartbreaking. And I'm so excited for your next book, Miranda, and books have such strange gestational life. I feel like children come like they're like clockwork, if you're lucky. But books are very mysterious. Yeah, I think Sleep Donation was written in 2014, and a lot of my concerns have grown they're the same. They're more acute now. One thing that I think I might have reconsidered, there's a nightmare appendix in the back of the book. And I think pre-pandemic, this seemed like a funnier thing to me, or more whimsical or more playful to have there's like a map of contagious nightmares, and they're like sleep quarantine stations. And these were all modeled on like CDC brochures. And I worked with these Italian artists, and we were doing this in November. And then disorientingly, we were on that same website looking for information. So I do think I'm the worst. I have no idea how it's being received, but probably not. This is not the framing I would have wished for, and it was just the most surreal thing. And I think that's my fear a little bit about Sleep Donation is like, oh, I hope it doesn't seem in like horrifically poor taste that there is like this nightmare appendix with a contagion map, in the back. But that's just, there it is, Oh.
Yeah, I think
Proof of your prescience to a certain extent.
Oh, it is just interesting though, right? Like how your orientation to your own work, or just the way you read, how it's always moving. Like there's no kind of stable relationship there.
Yeah.
All right. Trevor is asking for Miranda, as you were working on the novel, did you work on each section in succession, or were there times you bounced around between them while drafting?
Oh, I definitely bounced around. And in part, so Jordan Pavlin, who's the wonderful editor that Karen and I share, she did me a great favor. When she got the manuscript, the book was not in chronological order. I had some ideas about structure that were, I think, informed more by my desire to write a slightly difficult book than they were informed by sort of narrative necessity.
Interesting.
So yeah, I had not, in part because of the way that it was constructed previously, and in part because I would get to a point where I could not work on a section anymore, and I needed to take a break, and so I would move to a different part. Yeah.
Was the ending did it always land where it lands now?
No, the ending, and I don't regret this, but I do think that the ending initially was the end of Fresno 2014, which is like her our unnamed narrator sort of getting increasingly intoxicated, and then responding to her son, who is who is an infant and who is crying. And that's where it ended originally. And I do think that was a good ending, but I think that it serves the book as a whole better the way that it's arranged now.
Oh, I love where it lands, but it felt like such a surprise to me, and I wondered if it surprised you too to dismount there.
I think I certainly did not know that it was going to have an ending that was. I think of the ending as quite hopeful.
It is, yeah,
it is. She's made some decisions in her life that are going to move her to a different space. It might not be a better space. I hope it's a better space, but it's only going to be a different space. And she's been sort of working through the same shit for so long. It is sort of a relief to give her this door that's opening for her.
Yeah, that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
There's a David Gates story that I love, and I had that same sort of feeling where he's like, it might not sound like much to you, like, and it's true, right? If you sort of saw, I feel like a camera on that last scene might not present that same hopefulness that a reader feels after going on this journey with her.
Yeah, I wonder, if I were to direct that last scene, I think that there is a way to sort of show her sort of small and isolated in a vast landscape in a way that expresses the possibility of that landscape, as opposed to the ways in which that sort of scene can be isolating or dominating.
Yeah, right. Or like she's escaping some of the claustrophobia of those really kind of tight-knit narratives. Like,
and those close little rooms in which they happen.
Karen, since you've published both, and then I'm going to list off three things. Since you published novels, novellas, short story, I'm wondering what you have kind of conjuring in your mind and what we might anticipate from you next. And same for you, Miranda. Like, we all want something.
I would be so thrilled. For a second, I was like, oh, I wish you would just read the name of some novel that I've written and forgotten I wrote, like on that piece of paper. Like, I wish that could happen in some weird time warp. I've been really struggling to finish a second novel for quite a long time, but I've been having a lot of fun with stories right now. So we'll see. I sort of wrote this giant, Miranda mentioned a novel that failed. Like, I had this thing, I think like, it was like, there's a plane here in Oregon called the Spruce Goose that is just like so literally burdened by ambition. Like, it flew like 30 feet and crashed. So I have like this sort of behemoth that feels like that. And I think I might have found like the satellite. We'll see. But I'm working on a novel, but like in a crazy way, and then writing stories, which are all such a pleasure.
The Spruce Goose, that's the Howard Hughes plane, right?
Yeah.
He like kept pouring his life savings into this like wooden plane that couldn't fly.
Well, isn't that a good metaphor for like the novel that you can't abandon?
Yeah, it really is.
There'll be a time.
Yeah. The Spruce Goose will fly again.
Yeah. He just gave up too soon.
Yeah, that was Howard Hughes's problem. He was not dedicated enough to any
of it. He wasn't. No. That monomaniac with his long curling nails and his weird plane.
His hyperbaric chamber.
I have to ask now selfishly, did you salvage pieces of the novel that you abandoned for topics of conversation, or is it still on your desktop, like maybe
someday? I mean, I made a really sort of obvious mistake, which is I tried to write a novel about marriage like the year after I got married. So like had not done enough processing. And I mean, that was one of the many, many problems that I had writing that novel. Mostly it was just a really boring novel. And when you are bored by your own novel, like, you have to like get off the plane and just like burn it.
Yeah, it's true. You have to take your luggage for the country you'll never arrive at, and just
inflate the slide and just float away.
And where are you working on anything now, or?
I have some stories. I want to say like the word formally inventive, but then the words formally inventive, because that's sort of the direction the stories are going in. But also I feel like 200 people across the country just like closed their ears and were like, what does that sound? But yeah, I have some like formal experiments that I'm working on, but there is a novel in my head that I feel like I can't talk about. But one possibility is it's maybe set at least in part in St. Louis. So there is a version of the future in which I come back to St. Louis at least for a few months because it's a great place to live. I really love the city of St. Louis. Oh, sorry to be political, but I hear you guys are having a mayoral election.
We are.
And I'm 100% in for Tashora Jones. I voted for her for when she ran for mayor last time. So if you were on the fence and what you needed was a novelist who lives in Massachusetts to tell you who to vote for, congratulations, you now know who to vote for. Anyway, yeah, so part of my plan, if the novel does end up being set, at least in part in St. Louis, would be to go back and live there for a while.
Shane, maybe if we play our cards right, we can have cameos in this book. Let's.
Oh, yes. That was not even close to what I was imagining.
No,
I was like, oh well, Miranda can like be back here for a little bit. We can do another event for, I don't know, like the book that she's writing. We'll just be like, this is a really pre-party event, and then you can come visit Karen, and we can do. Yeah.
We'll do it in Dimensions. I miss browsing so much. I miss like the dowsing rod of your finger in a bookstore. Like I just miss that so much.
I will say, Miranda, that I think you made the right choice because as a reader, I can definitely suffer through a like like I don't want to call anything boring, but like something that doesn't grab my attention. As a writer, you have to spend so much more time with the book. So if you are not entirely ready to spend time with it, then you did make the right choice. So.
Yeah, I think I did.
Yeah.
Were there sort of chapters from topics of conversation that got excised that now kind of exist? I was like, I think that there's like a shadow book and I want to read that book too.
There's not a ton because I write very slowly. There's that Fran Lebowitz quote about how like every time she writes, it's like she has to cut her own veins open and write in blood. I think it's from her Paris Review interview. And I do feel like true physical discomfort.
Cutting things.
The act of writing. Physical discomfort also attends the act of not writing. So it's like either way, I'm sort of in pain, emotionally, whatever. But so I write so slowly that there wasn't a ton that got cut. But and the parts that got cut, they're not good. Like they got cut for a reason.
I read this beautiful interview with you on Guernica where you were talking about revising by physically. I mean, there was something so kind of workmanlike about like physically typing out your manuscript again. That's really true. I mean, I loved that idea, but it seems so rigorous also.
I mean, all credit to Catherine Davis, who teaches at Washington University in St. Louis and taught me in the MFA and was an amazing reader, mentor, etc. And she gave me this piece of advice which revolutionized the way that I revise. And I will never revise any other way. But whatever section you're working on, like you print it out and you mark it up and then you retype it. And it works. It's somehow more possible.
It's so beautiful to me. It just feels correct for this book in particular, right? Where it's like you can have these ossified ideas about who you are and what's possible for you, and the same happens with your fiction. For me too, you know, or you decide what kind of story you're telling, and it really the paint dries, and it can be so hard to find the courage to play around again. I don't know.
I think also because so much of it is dialogue. Typing and retyping, it was really a test of, does this sound like something that someone could plausibly, like, can you suspend your disbelief? You know, there is a suspension of disbelief. These conversations could not really happen in the way that they're described, but it was a real test of, does this sound plausible as I'm retyping it, as I'm hearing it in my head for the fourth or the fifth or the sixth time? Does it seem in the realm of possibility? And it was really helpful in that way.
I saw you love Annie Baker too, and I saw such a kinship between your work, such a kinship, you know.
That is so flattering, because she is really.
She has that same gift, though, for capturing the real rhythms of speech, even though you know on some level it's being selected and it's an artifice, and you know. But,
All right. Well, I would love for this conversation to go on forever. We have reached our hour mark, which was not difficult at all. I knew that this conversation was going to be brilliant, and it was. I want to, first off, again, say that it is so incredible that you are donating money to both of those incredible causes. So buy a copy from Left Bank Books. I have provided a link.
Guys. Bankrupt.
Yeah, that would be great. If so, Miranda, let me know, and I will definitely be making a donation as well. But we also have copies of Karen's fantastic new book, Sleep Donation, as well on our shelves. So you could buy both books, and we will be happy to send them to you. And Miranda will be making a donation from your support. There we go. But this was such an incredible evening, Karen. It was really wonderful.
So fun. Miranda, it was great to meet you. Shane, thank you so much for hosting us. I want to go swimming with you when we're vaccinated. I think we could do a shot-by-shot remake just in our Lynchian bathing caps.
Absolutely. It's a date.
Congratulations, everybody! Please buy this brilliant book. It is amazing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, what an honor to get to launch the paperback, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the pool. We'll cannonball.
Sounds great.
Bye.
Miranda, thank you so much. And to the audience, we will see you again really soon. Be sure to check out the events calendar. A lot of fantastic events coming up. Have a good night.